listening to Overwatch League Daily, your daily source for Overwatch League news, scores, and more. Here's your host, KickedTripod.
Good morning, Overwatch League fans, and welcome to Overwatch League Daily, your daily source for Overwatch League news, scores, and opinions. I am John KickedTripod Horseman, and here's your Overwatch League Daily episode for December 24th, 2017. On today's show, I'm joined by Overwatch caster and analyst Seamoose Anderson to discuss the Overwatch League Academy teams and what it means for the Overwatch competitive scene. We'll be covering more contenders info in depth next week with Gilfrost, but I reached out to Seamoose to have him share his thoughts on one of the surprises from the contenders announcement, Overwatch League Academy teams. Overwatch League Academy teams, as far as we know, are contenders teams that are fielded under an official Overwatch League team banner. Most of the Overwatch League teams will be fielding a roster for the 2018 Contenders Season 1 as they look to nurture upcoming talent for the Overwatch League. So Seamoose, let's start here. From the beginning, the Overwatch League has put a major emphasis on developing talent through multiple levels of play. What is the significance of these Overwatch League Academy rosters?
This is something that I think is really, really good, and I think most people agree with that because the Academy rosters provide a lot of things for players and the community. Most easily for players, a very direct link between Overwatch League organizations because they're already working within the system of the established franchises. And if you are successful or you're a good performer on an Overwatch League Academy team, it's easier for you to become an Overwatch League main player than making it from a non-Academy contenders team to the Overwatch League itself.
Do you think that this will be good for the overall quality of competition in contenders? And how do you think these Academy teams will differ from other contenders teams?
As far as the difference between Academy teams versus other contenders teams, now this is going to be an interesting point because other contenders teams supported by either non-endemic, which I don't think we'll really see, or purely endemic esports organizations, organizations that have been around for a while, it'll be an interesting comparison because theoretically speaking, the Academy teams, every Academy team has that financial backing to an extent that I mentioned before. Regardless of how much is budgeted for the Academy team, they still are part of a parent organization that is relatively well off when it comes to finances. The sponsors and some of the contenders teams we might see technically could be in a worse position financially. They just don't have that sort of support. But it could also be a situation in which an endemic organization that's playing in contenders in future seasons looks to actually prove to the Overwatch League staff themselves, Nate Nanzer, the rest of the team at Blizzard, that they are a viable partner, that they're very good at developing talent, that they treat their players, their staff, and everyone well. And as a result, that they should potentially be a future partner as a franchise team in the Overwatch League. So I still think the Academy teams overall have the initial advantage when it comes to infrastructure because they already have some systems in place. But the contenders teams that are coming from endemics, that are supported by endemics, aren't going to necessarily be at a disadvantage. It's just a matter of how the team wants to support them. And ideally, you don't see contenders teams that are signed as just kind of throwing money at the team and giving them the brand name. Ideally, you see contenders teams trying to push the envelope, non-Overwatch League teams, right? Non-Academy teams. But with that in mind, I still think the Academy teams overall have the advantage in terms of support structure. And we'll see whether or not that actually matters when it comes to recruitment, when it comes to the support that they play, how they look throughout the tournament, etc.
How has this academy-like structure worked in sports and other esports?
Essentially giving the offer and then having 9 contenders academy teams is something that's really good to see, because ultimately in a franchise system, you'll see academy teams in professional sports as well be the way to really harvest talent and develop talent and take even more risks that are basically to determine whether or not a player or whomever is good enough to make it as a top pro. The fact that the majority of these teams, these Overwatch League teams with Academy rosters, are going to be Overwatch League caliber teams. The fact that the majority of the teams and contenders will essentially have the backing, and they won't be as funded as the main Overwatch League teams, but they will be basically supported by, the San Francisco Shock will support their Academy team. That's a ton of money. That's a lot of infrastructure. That's a lot of valuable insight that these Academy teams and the players and the staff within them will have. And that's a way to really just foster and continue the connection of becoming a semi-professional and then an actual professional player, because someone who might go from the Academy team to the main team won't even feel as if he's going into a different scenario, because some of the similarities between how the teams operate are going to be there. The owner and stuff, they're all going to be the same. So I'm actually curious to see whether or not eventually Academy teams are mandated or required, but for now, just the fact that they existed, there's a lot of them, and there's also room for non-Academy teams in contenders is a pretty good thing.
What do you think will make these teams unique?
The Academy teams are really unique in the sense that the stakes are certainly lower. I know you want to win, obviously, but you're not playing for hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars in front of thousands of fans online, hundreds in person, potentially millions for on the Overwatch League stage itself. So the contenders teams can go with philosophies and go with perhaps even players that are a little bit riskier, they're hypothesized, but they're not understood as well. They're a little bit unorthodox, and they're not certain whether or not it's successful or not, but they just want to say, hey, we're going to go with this philosophy and see how that works.
Do you think these teams are going to be run the same as the head teams, or do you think they'll run with a different philosophy?
The Academy teams themselves, compared to the Overwatch League teams themselves, will really look to have the same core values. I think core values in an organization are very important, and the player should buy into the core values. But the model and how you develop these players, you can definitely experiment a little bit more. And the nice thing is that you can also hire different staff. I mean, obviously, your head coach from your Overwatch League team isn't really going to be able to spend a lot of time on the Academy team since he's so busy with the Overwatch League team itself. So you can develop that staff and try different things, and then have the staff members across each team, perhaps weekly or monthly or whatever, discuss feedback, ping it back and forth. The Academy guy can bring up some issues he's having to the head coach from the Overwatch League team, and the Overwatch League team can say, oh, I'm pretty experienced, I've encountered that before, this is what will help. Or the Academy team brings something to the main team, the staff say, okay, this is something that we've tried, and we actually didn't expect or didn't know if it would work, but it worked out really well, and we think you guys should try implementing it, and then, they can move on from there.
So based on your own experience, what philosophy would you recommend using when nurturing and creating these Overwatch Academy teams?
So again, the Academy teams themselves, I mean, there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of different ways to handle it. I still think the buy-in overall in the organization, the core values, with it as many people in any organization as possible should align. But I do think because you have less to lose and it's not as big of a stage, you should take more risks with the Academy team. You should try things that you're not certain if they're going to work, but they have potentially huge upsides. So that's the difference between the Academy teams overall as far as the Overwatch League teams themselves. At least personally, if I were in charge of an organization, that's how I would run it. I think having the opportunity to go for different styles, different flavors, it's quite a unique opportunity. So yeah.
So let's theory craft this a little bit. If you were fielding your own contenders team and had to sign a tank, DPS, and support, who would you sign today and why?
My philosophy is the main shot caller is one of the most important roles to build around because they'll be most commonly played and are going to be quite instrumental to the success of the team. Now, with that in mind, generally you'll see the IGL of an organization, of a team, I should say, is going to be the Lucio player. However, in this case, there's a couple of different Lucio players I have in mind that are maybe not all at the same level, but I'm not 100% dead set on who I would pick up as a Lucio, if that makes sense. So even though my own philosophy, I would pick up the Lucio first, if I had to sign these three players today, I actually am less certain about the Lucio player, and the first 3 players I would pick up are probably AKM for DPS, Rolf as support, and then the tank would be Fact Fiction. So Rolf as support is mechanically a phenomenal Zenyatta. I've worked with him before. I know what his attitude is like. I know what his comms are like. I think he has the right kind of comms for the role. He definitely has the right mindset for the role. And even besides his Zenyatta, like mechanically, this guy is absolutely fantastic. He's been crushing it in solo queue. He's very driven to win, and this might be a little bit of bias just because we've worked together before, and I'm not trying to make it sound that way, but the people you work with influence your perceptions. I do think he is one of the best flex supports out there right now, and certainly when it comes to West, and most of my experience is within the West and NA specifically, so I'm going to limit it to those choices. I guess AKM isn't, but you know what I mean. So Rolf, I think he'd be absolutely fantastic, really be a carry star, or at least have the potential to carry from the back line, which is something that not every flex support and every team has, which is why I'd pick him up. As far as DPS is concerned, AKM is undoubtedly, without a question, the best Western DPS player that does not have a team. There's a couple of other guys that I'd be interested in overall because I like their ethic. Shout out to X-Resi is an honorable mention of mine because I think he has a fantastic ethic and I really like his communications calling, even though he's a DPS player. But like AKM is in a league of his own when it comes to his individual ability to dominate a game, and any team would be, that's like a 10 out of 10 role. You'd max out at least one half of your DPS duo by picking him up. I've never worked with him personally, but I haven't heard anything as far as attitude issues or anything are concerned, so that seems like a no-brainer. As far as tank, I would pick up Fact Fiction. Fact Fiction, again, none of these choices are probably too surprising. He is Team USA's tank for the 2017 Overwatch World Cup. He's been well known for his days on FaZe. I'm not sure if he's still contracted with them or not. And he's a really strong player. He and I also know each other personally fairly well, and I think we get along. I think that in terms of working with him, I'd be able to do so well, and we are aligned when it comes to some of the goals we have. So those would be my 3 choices that I would just look to pick up instantly. Ideally, with that core in mind, I'd also want to pick up a main support fairly soon.
Some are speculating that Overwatch League teams might field multiple contenders teams in the future. Do you think that's likely to happen?
I do not think this is likely to happen, just because I think that would have competitive integrity issues, and that's something that I don't think Blizzard would like. It would be cool for Overwatch League teams, the more teams they can look at, and the more of these low-risk investments they can make to try and figure out how they want to run things, the better for the Overwatch League teams themselves. But if these 2 Overwatch League teams or these contender teams are playing each other for something important, who's to say there won't be collusion? Who's to say any matter of things can happen? And that's just not something you see pretty commonly, that multiple teams under the somewhat same banner are within the same league.
I think that makes a lot of sense, but what about the open division teams? Do you think that we will see a similar academy-like structure for open division as well?
The open division teams are actually a really interesting point because the open division itself is obviously the step before contenders. That's what it's made to be. The path to pro, now that it's been outlined, is really cool. And out of the 7 academy teams that are in North America, one being European, London, and the other Shanghai, so 9 teams total, 7 teams in North America. Just to talk about the American contenders scene, it'll be pretty interesting to see how the open division teams actually do, because ultimately an open division team, even compared to a team like Kungarna or Renegades, who are have been gifted entries if they choose to accept them into the qualifiers, if I'm not mistaken, the 8-man tournament to try and qualify for contenders. Those teams are like the open division teams compared to even some of these smaller teams are going to be at a pretty distinct disadvantage because they're going to be very, very young. They're going to be very inexperienced and just don't have the development when it comes to the overall infrastructure compared to some of the other teams. That being said, though, with so many open teams competing in the qualifier and the fact that there's 3 seasons of contenders a year, which I think is a fantastic choice, it's very likely that we do see some of these players and some of these teams making waves. We'll just see whether or not they're able to stack up against the infrastructure teams later down the line. Obviously, an open division team that does relatively well either qualifies for the qualifier to contenders or even makes it to contenders throughout the entire path will be very likely picked up, and that's something that I imagine will happen without a doubt. But it's still going to be harder right now because there are more known quantities in the Overwatch scene that didn't make it into the league to compete against and show up against. It'll be hard for open division teams, just obviously to win the division itself and then to try and compete against contenders teams.
There's obviously a lot of really interesting conversations to have about open division and how it relates to contenders, and I definitely want to do an episode about it later on in the future. Once we see the first little bit of open division happen, I think it'll be an awesome time to go ahead and chat a little bit more about the Overwatch League amateur scene. My thanks to Seamoose for joining me on the episode today. His insight's always amazing. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at SeaMooseA. And yeah, that's going to do it for us for this one. We're going on a little break for the holiday, but I am back from Hawaii. Thank you so much for everyone for your patience while I'm off on my wedding and honeymoon, for letting me miss a couple of episodes. But going into the new year, we won't miss any more. Have an amazing holiday wherever you are. Remember, you can find the show on any of your favorite podcast outlets, including iTunes, SoundCloud, and Spotify. We're also on YouTube too. Click on the link in the show notes to find us. If you want to stay in touch, email me at overwatchleaguedaily@gmail.com, tweet me at OWLDailyShow, or join our Discord at discord.me/OWLDailyShow. That's going to do it for today. We'll be back on Wednesday for another episode of Overwatch League Daily.